Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Today's episode is one that I'm extremely excited about because it centers on progress. But before we can discuss the positive direction that I feel industrial cybersecurity is heading in, we do have to take a look at our current situation. After all, there's still a number of alarming facts that can keep us up at night, like Fortinet reporting that 3/4 of industrial enterprises reported at least one OT intrusion in the last year. The key word there being reported. So it might be a little bit more than that. And actually, nearly 1/3 of all ransomware attacks continue to target the industrial sector, with a nearly 10% uptick in attacks going undetected until the extortion or blackmail note arrives. And intrusions from malware and phishing schemes have increased by 1/3. But there's also good news. Fortinet also reports that 98% of organizations now include its OT cybersecurity posture in briefings with executive leadership. The heightened conversation seems to have instilled a greater focus and level of investment in industrial cybersecurity, and you have to believe this ties into multiple findings showing shorter hacker dwell times, quicker responses from manufacturers during a hack, and more focus being paid to cybersecurity during new technology implementations. We also know more about the bad guys today than we ever have before. Now, obviously, we're still a long way from popping the champagne and celebrating a hard-fought victory over ransomware as a service gangs, state-sponsored cyber criminals, or any other element of the social engineering community. But the industrial sector's cybersecurity collective does appear to have earned the right to take a second and appreciate their progress while continuing to keep their foot on the gas and trying to keep pace with an ever-evolving threat landscape. Some of this progress could be attributed to something I've long endorsed and is the cornerstone of the work being done by today's guests. We're excited to announce that this episode of Security Breach is being sponsored by Palo Alto Networks. Protect your OT assets, networks, and remote operations with zero trust OT security, powered by AI and machine learning while offering comprehensive visibility, zero trust security for all OT environments, and simplified operations. For more information, please visit www.paloaltonetworks.com/network-security. It's my pleasure to welcome Adam Pennington and Jake Steele from MITRE's Attack Knowledge Database to the program. Adam and Jake, thanks for joining us today and welcome to Security Breach. So Adam and Jake, thanks so much for joining us today and welcome to Security Breach. I thought maybe just to kind of kick things off, I think most of the people listening and watching are familiar with the Attack database, but let's just start from the ground floor. Maybe you can fill us in a little bit on what it is and how people are utilizing it right now.
Sure. And let me get a little bit into the way that we think about it and a lot of the ways we're seeing it being used. And so the term we usually use for attack is knowledge base, but database is fairly descriptive of what it is we're doing too. So it's a collection of behaviors that adversaries have done in the real world. It's freely available. Anyone can use it anywhere in the world. It is only based on activity that has happened from real world adversaries. So it's not things that penetration testers or people simulating activity have done. It's things that we've gotten from threat intelligence that people have done maliciously in real world environments. It's been around now since about 2013 when we started it in response to doing some internal MITRE exercises. We put it out in the public around 2015, thinking that other people might find it useful too. And it seems a decent number of people have. We've expanded over the years into first mobile devices, so things like iOS and Android, and more recently in 2020, launching into industrial control systems. The community has grown phenomenally around attack to the point where we even run our own conference. We've got coming up in just 6 weeks now, AttackCon 4.0, and having people showcase the ways that they're using attack. A lot of that comes down to building up their defenses, mapping out what things that they've actually got, watching different adversaries. People are using it as a way to organize what they know about adversaries, so their cyber threat intelligence, planning out their activities for red teams, adversary emulation, and then a lot of organizations are pulling that all together into assessments and engineering. So we see sort of a broad set of use cases. We also see everything from people using it for teaching in colleges now. We recently lectured in some high school classrooms. And so it's been really neat to see people take this thing that we didn't really know how it was going to be used and find some interesting use cases for it that we never imagined.
Absolutely. Adam, could you talk us through the mechanics a little bit? How is the data collected? Is it a proactive dynamic where you're going out? Are people sending stuff to you? How does that work?
Almost everything that goes into attack today is coming from contributors. People around the world are looking at attack. They're seeing something either in a public threat intelligence report or something they're seeing in their own activity and pinging us saying, hey, this is real and you're missing it. And so we're, of course, watching a lot of the reporting that's coming out from big organizations. We have individuals on the team dedicated to watching in specific spaces. So everything from Jake here watching industrial control system space to individuals specifically focused on mobile, Linux, Mac, Windows, enterprise, and so various areas that adversaries are operating in. And so it is a mix of the two, but most things these days are triggered by the outside community.
So, Jake, I could imagine this being utilizing a number of different facets for a number of different strategies, especially when you look at attack surface management or just understanding the threat landscape a little bit better. Looking specifically at OT, what are you seeing? Are you seeing specific best practices coming out from the use of the attack knowledge base, or are there different types of attacks that are really sort of setting people's radar off a little bit? What are you seeing specific to OT?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as things kind of have been changing over time for the number of attacks and different types of attacks, I think there's been things that have come up, specifically like ransomware came onto the map and really started to bring everyone's focus towards that. Other things like the types of malware and how the evolution of that malware has changed over time has been something that we can kind of try and help highlight on the different tactics and techniques that are leveraged, especially on how they may relate between, an older malware set versus something that's really trying to cover a lot of different protocols or get to multiple different industries. So I think that's part of the benefit of the way that we represent it on attack, where we can show the different techniques that apply and how they may overlap over time. So I think that that's one of the key areas, plus tying it all back to the defenses that the end defenders can use to protect their infrastructure, I think is the big part of it.
So have you seen any trends or best practices evolve in terms of maybe people cherry picking a little bit? I like to take this and apply it here, or is it still sort of becoming more familiar with it and more of a customized plugin however they need to?
When it comes to best practices, I think we also have tried to tie it back to standards. So that's been kind of a big part of, they definitely pick on certain areas. I think, initial access as a tactic and usually like impact are kind of the key areas that people really try and focus on. But we try and tie this back to the best practices and standards that we can find in both NIST as well as 62443. We've tried to tie it into those OT specific standards so that if you're familiar from that background, you can leverage that and really try and apply those standards in the best way possible.
Sure. And, kind of looking to both of you for some input here, but the manufacturing sector, obviously a lot of IT elements as well as OT security challenges there. When using the attack, I keep wanting to call it a database, the knowledge base that we have there. How can the enterprise best use it? We kind of have this, we want to get IT and OT out of these silos and working together, but some of these attacks have some shared similarities, some best lessons learned. Adam, maybe you can start by talking a little bit about how those things kind of converge within the knowledge base and how they can be extracted for both IT and OT.
Yeah, right now we keep them sort of in separate silos. In a lot of cases, we're doing that looking at how organizations are defending themselves and how they're breaking up their own security today. It's not necessarily, where we hope things are going to go in the future. But so we've kept things to where in the enterprise framework, we're talking about Windows, Linux, Mac, cloud, network devices, obviously, most of which have some role in OT networks as well. I mean, it's still a Windows system. It might just be a much older version of Windows. And so there is a lot of going back and forth. And so we've kept to where in a lot of intrusions, people are getting into something like an HMI in the enterprise side. And so where they're in the traditional networks and done a little bit more of a cutover to Jake's space, the ICS space. talking more the under the hood, the PLCs, the embedded networks. And my hope is, and we've talked about this some in public in the past, that we'll eventually see some work towards convergence. We've tried to talk about some ways you can go back and forth between the two, but it really is something that we're looking to more in the future right now as people get into the space, rather than putting it all together and trying to force it. So we're following a little bit rather than trying to push people.
Yeah. Jake, what are you seeing there? I'm sorry.
Yeah. And kind of to add on to that, from kind of the beginning of Attack for ICS, we included sort of what we've referred to as kind of the overlap and some subset of techniques where they're kind of crucial. Generally, it's the transfer, like lateral movement and initial access, where these systems are what Adam was talking about. They're Windows systems running OT processes. So it could be a Windows device running an HMI software, or like a data historian of some sort that has a tie over to both matrices. And with this, we're trying to include really the tactics and techniques that are leveraged once you're within what we kind of defined as the ICS space or the OT domain, what the OT security practitioners would really be able to control and defend. So that's kind of one of the drawing points that we try and focus on. And moving forward, I think it is really important that we move towards kind of that convergence that Adam was talking about, as well as we have an ongoing effort to define what these assets are. And with that, we can define kind of how they may be vulnerable, and moving forward, what you might be able to do to defend them, or better understand what these assets are and how they apply to both the enterprise techniques and ICS.
I guess, again, we're seeing a lot of enterprises, they'll look, especially if they look at the attack knowledge base, they'll see, okay, IT, OT attacks, and they see them sort of in the same place. They'll think they can apply the same solution. We can still learn a ton from those attacks, but the solution needs to be unique, right?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, going back to some of the ransomware stuff, that's we've talked to some utilities, and they were really, have dialed in and focused on this because it can directly impact both their enterprise system and eventually cause an impact on the OT operations. So I think that there is definitely some handling of how to best represent this and make your OT system more resilient, and kind of try and understand it from a holistic threat perspective, but also be able to really tune in those defenses down to what makes sense for each domain. And then, improving visibility for across the whole enterprise is really crucial for that.
Yeah, visibility continues to be a challenge. You talked about getting an inventory of all the assets. That's another conversation we could definitely go down the wormhole on. One of the things I want to talk to you guys about, Adam, you said about all of this information coming in voluntarily, especially being submitted in for the knowledge base. Have you seen that increase in recent years? Are companies becoming more open to sharing this information and becoming more transparent about the attacks?
It's both directions, depending on sort of what you're talking about. Back when we started, nobody was talking about post-compromise adversary behaviors. It was a really tough nut to crack and get information on what was real, what was going on back when attack was first being created. That's improved dramatically over the years, and we've seen a big growth in especially incident response firms publishing their own information, a lot of times as part of their marketing, but still good public, freely available threat intelligence on things that are actually happening in the wild. Victim stigma has definitely gone down in a lot of ways, where people have accepted that break-ins happen.
Yeah.
They're not the only one that it's ever happened to ever. We do see some knee-jerk in the other direction too, though. There is an increased amount of putting incident response behind lawyers in order to protect it around attorney-client privilege, to be able to make it so they can't even be forced to release details of an intrusion. And so we are seeing some activities that are driving pieces of it towards closer hold. On the whole, though, especially since attack came out, tons more information out there. And in a lot of cases, the environment we're working in, we're not looking for people's threat intelligence. We don't want to know which customer's data was stolen. We're not going to publish which company saw the individual intrusion. And if you want to contribute to us and not be named an attack, we're more than happy to do that. We're looking for confirmation that things are real, that an adversary actually did something. And we are looking towards, trusted sources, places we believe to answer that and give us enough detail to understand what's going on. But at the end of the day, some of that filter has made people more comfortable talking to us sometimes than putting it out there in the open.
Jake, are you seeing any differences specific to the OT side of things? We look at manufacturing and industrial.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's at times some hesitation, but at the same time, I think that the kind of goal and benefit of the information sharing has really been communicated well across a lot of these different industrial sectors. I mean, there's information sharing centers that are common across industrial communities. And, I think as we move forward, this starts to get a bit more towards better reporting and better understanding of the technical details of what's actually occurring. And I think that's really important for moving forward as different organizations improve their security or OT security posture. They can fill out a lot of those, the kind of basics of OT security, and then move towards, what's the next step and how do we get more information to really apply more advanced detections and protections for our industrial sector. So I think it's going in that direction, definitely at a good pace. But
well, that's great to hear. Very positive. And with this next question, I want to word it very carefully because I don't want it to seem like a negative. I know that we need to make sure we have all the information as possible before we start sharing stuff. But are either of you seeing a little bit of a concern in terms of the time lag, in terms of something happens, we do want to share the information about the attack, but man, we make sure we have all our ducks in a row before we do it. In the meantime, somebody else might be getting hit with a similar type of attack. Is that time lag still a challenge or a difficulty from your perspectives?
I think we're seeing a lot of success in peer-to-peer sharing in a lot of timeliness. So the ISACs, the ISOs, the peer-to-peer organizations where people are coming together with like-minded organizations and being able to share that information in a trusted environment. And oftentimes those peer relationships are not even through some official organization. It's, the people that know each other in a particular industry getting the word out. And that's not perfect. It might be better if things were coming together in a more formal way in some cases, but it is still getting the information out there. The growth of incident response firms has also been a place where information is getting collected. Having one organization that is doing a lot of work across sector that has this visibility, is able to anonymize it, filter it, reuse it fairly quickly in other places, is plugging some of the gaps where real-time sharing isn't necessarily working today.
You've both mentioned visibility as an issue, and that keeps popping up here. I mean, there's a couple of different topics we just can't get away from. From your perspectives, are there certain things that are happening right now within these ICS, within these industrial control systems that are really helping to improve visibility, even from maybe 6-12 months ago?
In terms of visibility, I think first, a key component of that is better understanding of, what you actually have in your environments. And I think better defining of what those assets are, what they do, the different protocols and communications are kind of important for that. In terms of technology that's moving towards that direction, I mean, there's numerous platforms that can do similar types of functions, and they're working towards better integration between kind of that asset management and security type platform. Otherwise, there's also, public parsers and things that are being developed for the ICS community that can really help to highlight those low-level protocol events and things to try and improve that visibility. So I think all of this is aspects, both community and product-wise, that can kind of moved in the direction of increasing that visibility.
Makes sense. You both have kind of mentioned a little bit that there's less shame sort of attached with being open, the fact that you were a victim of a hit, of an attack, of a hack, or whatever else. Within the industrial sector, I think there's still some of that reticence to share that because there is a lot of, embarrassment associated with being the result of a hack. And I think that's getting a lot of people talking about more government regulation coming into it. We already see it with a lot of critical infrastructure. They have to report an attack within so much time. They have to let them know if there's ransom being asked for, all of those types of things. As a result of that, and looking to get more information and be as transparent as we can, how do you guys feel about potentially more government intervention in sort of enforcing the fact that, hey, look, if you're a manufacturer, because you are critical in terms of supply chain and product improvement, getting stuff to the consumer, you need to be more transparent with this stuff than maybe the government is saying right now. How do you guys feel about the government having a greater level of involvement in enforcing people to talk about some of these attacks?
When it comes to, for attack, and specifically in the public sector or public view of threat intelligence for like attack for ICS, there's kind of that limited data set, and I'm sure everyone sees it across their industry of, what information is accessible. And we have maybe a handful of incidents that really make up the core of the ICS focused and technical information that is represented in attack. So increasing that technical visibility and transparency is really crucial, and helps to kind of better and incorporate those different defenses and mitigations and understanding for the whole community at broad. So I think that's definitely helpful for us in attack as well as the community as a whole.
Okay. So, Ed, I want to go back to you a little bit. You mentioned doing some talks even in schools and things like that, talking about what you guys are up to. To me, that seems to bleed into what we have as a bigger issue, especially in the industrial sector, which is getting more people interested in this type of profession, especially OT cybersecurity. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of your experiences just in being a part of that outreach and getting more people talking about the subject overall, and what the feedback you've received has been like.
Yeah, it's been great sort of seeing a much broader community getting into cybersecurity the last decade or so, where we're seeing it coming into place a lot more in colleges, where we're seeing clubs come up doing computer security, doing different competitions around attacking and defending, a lot of them using MITRE ATT&CK. We're seeing attack being used in curriculum in a lot of these colleges now, where they're using it as a sort of teaching a technique at a time out of attack, sort of increasing that knowledge and having it start a lot earlier. And we're seeing all sorts of programs that are getting down into either the high school or even in some cases elementary school level, increasing awareness that computer security is a thing, might be something you're interested in someday. So I think there's been a lot of success in this space. I think there's still a ton more that can be done in terms of both awareness, sort of building up some of the interest and fundamentals. But I think there's also a very broad set of experiences that can be leveraged in these spaces where we're not necessarily today. For example, we bring in a lot of people around cyber threat intelligence, looking at analyzing what adversaries are doing, looking at some of the reporting, trying to pull that together and build a picture. And one of the things we found is that experiences where people have learned how to think, how to process information, how to pull together into an answer can often be big pieces of the solution. So not so much traditional STEM, but in some cases, former journalists, people coming from a philosophy background where they've learned how to think and analyze. And so, places that you might not so much expect it. So I'm a big fan of increasing sort of the hard side of it, getting security down younger and younger age. But I think there's also sometimes a broader set of experiences that we can take advantage of in this space.
No, it makes a ton of sense. Jake, I'd be interested. I'm asking you all the hard questions here because the OT stuff is much more dialed in or a little bit more specific or narrow. But, it's a huge issue right now for manufacturers in finding OT cybersecurity specialists. Has there been anything that you've seen in terms of people trying to develop these skill sets internally or how they're trying to transition to keep pace with the needs that all this new technology on the plant floor is creating?
In some ways, this was kind of my background as well. And I have kind of experience in that coming from a more traditional cyber, although my program, I come from a STEM program focused on cybersecurity with core aspects focusing or talking about industrial control systems and critical infrastructure. But that's not the majority of programs out there from colleges right now. And, there's maybe some training out there for really trying to refine going from cyber to that OT cyber. But it's definitely a big challenge of really finding those OT cyber people that can do the type of job. And, an example that I can kind of give from my experience here at MITRE, actually, I joined in a program that was for cyber new professionals, and it was like a rotational thing where I could move through and work on a lot of different aspects of cyber, all of which I chose to focus on OT, but different aspects of OT. And kind of jumping around through these 2 years of time, I was able to kind of capture a lot of different aspects of maybe it's looking at cyber threat intelligence through attack and kind of what led me to attack here, or moving towards, more traditional defense recommendations or assessments, those type of things that can all bring together different backgrounds and understanding of what cyber is and OT. I do think moving forward, there's been more resources, public resources for understanding what the challenges are for OT security and really trying to highlight, that low level information that to understand the process level coming from a more traditional cyber background. But I think that there's, in the same sense, there's also a lot more information of educating from more of an OT background up to understanding the cyber aspects. I think it can work both ways. And that's actually one of the core aspects that I try and incorporate into Attack for ICS when I can, to be able to provide that understanding that both sides, whether you're coming from a cyber background or OT background, you can kind of maybe have something that you can pull out to better understand of, both aspects of it and improve the OT security space.
Makes sense. Got to bring up another topic that also kind of weighs both sides of things, and that's artificial intelligence. It seems like this always comes up in the conversation. Love to get some feedback from you guys in terms of what you're seeing in terms of AI being used by the attackers, and then also really by the white hats as a potential solution. Adam, I'll maybe start with you on this one.
Sure. Yeah, so we're not necessarily seeing as much of it as we're concerned about seeing it.
Okay.
Yeah, it is definitely something where things like large language models, kind of latest Chat GPT, are really good at developing fake text.
Yeah.
And so potential use cases in things like spear phishing and fake phone calls, in things that are sort of enhancing parts of a existing intrusion. And we have concerns about where this might go, where adversaries might be abusing additional AI systems. MITRE's actually put out a parallel framework to attack that looks a lot like it, based on potential threats to AI ML systems called Atlas. Been out a year or two now. And so it's a space that MITRE's actually doing a decent amount of work thinking about. And so we're not necessarily seeing sort of adversaries turn into these big giant AI robots automating intrusions, and maybe it'll go there, but we're not necessarily seeing evidence that that's happening or that that's going to happen, at least not today. Where we are seeing greater and greater uses on the blue side, on defense. And so AI is pretty good at picking up patterns in noisy data, in fuzzy environments. It's not necessarily the greatest at saying, hey, this is the one answer, this is exactly it, but maybe focusing your attention on a particular area, finding some patterns that are out of place. And so we're seeing greater use in analyzing software to look for malware. We're seeing use in looking for patterns coming out of logs. And it's not necessarily that we're seeing these giant breakthroughs right now as it's getting talked about more in public. AI and ML have been in use in cybersecurity for decades now. I came out of the intrusion detection space, and we were talking about this in grad school. I don't want to say how long ago. And so it's not a completely new idea. There are some new defensive solutions that can potentially come out of things like large language models. So, for example, if you're trying to do things like adversary deception, which is sort of my other passion outside of attack, one of the problems you run into fooling adversaries is that you need lots of documents, lots of emails, just things to look like a real environment where you don't care if the facts are quite right, if it's exactly the right thing. And ChatGPT and large language models are really effective at saying a lot of things where you don't really care if it's true. And so there's some possibilities coming out where in specific areas we may be able to do some really interesting things. And so I think there's a lot of possibilities, a lot of things coming, but in some cases we may have to wait a little bit to see where it really goes. This has been a long buildup, and it's in some cases a little bit more that it's getting out there in public suddenly than necessarily a lot of just absolutely brand new things that weren't coming before.
Makes sense. So Jake, we don't have to worry about Skynet yet, but it seems like algorithms that could, see even minor adjustments in data could be huge for an industrial enterprise.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's something to keep on the radar and understand as it goes forward. But in terms of what we're seeing in the public view right now, in terms of adversaries, it's not quite there yet. But definitely good thing to keep on the radar.
Excellent. So, guys, I don't want to backtrack. This has been very positive, and that's what we're trying to do with this episode, because there's more information in the attack knowledge base that we can use to ward off. But one of the things that keeps coming to mind is the bad guys could be using this as well, right? In terms of understanding what we're learning about them. It's also a competitive environment potentially. Maybe they're throwing in information about their competitors to help their cause a little bit. I'd just kind of like to get maybe your response to that, if that's something that you guys think about, if there's really even a solution for it.
A piece of that is something we've actually thought about since the very beginning. Yeah. One of the reasons that attack is based on only real world information, on things that adversaries have already been seen to be done. And a second piece that I didn't mention earlier, which is there has to be a public description of the behavior already out there that is citable. Okay. So that could be black hat talk, it could be some security conference, anything where there is a description of the activity. And so it takes those two things together before we'll add something to attack. And so what that means is that anything that we're putting into attack, the adversary could have found on their own somewhere else. Okay. Now, we're creating a nice little collection of it. We recognize that, but we think that balances being able to help the defender at the same time as being respectful of proliferation.
Absolutely. Jake, anything you'd like to add there? Or?
I think... I think another aspect of it too is that at the level of abstraction that we talk about, especially on the ICS side, they're recognizable terms and understandable from someone from an OT background, but the level of information that an adversary might be able to pull from that is, not at the technical level that makes it more feasible for them.
Okay. Makes sense. So guys, appreciate all the information. This has been awesome. A couple things here just wrapping up. I got to ask, have there been any particular threat actors that you see have been becoming more popular or more common? You're seeing more stuff coming in from them. We just see so much ransomware in the industrial sector. We've seen people like Black Cat and Black Basta really sort of flooding. Lockbit's always been a huge player in the industrial sector. Are there any other big players that you've seen that have become more aggressive maybe in the last couple of months?
Sort of the obvious one ICS space is everything going on in Ukraine the past year and a half. Russia has been going wild there in the ICS space, where in terms of a lot of the stuff that's coming in terms of new techniques, new group activity, over and over and over again going on in that space. And so not necessarily of concern in the same way to the rest of the world, but it is sort of seeing what the techniques might be down the line if there are other problems. And so, absolutely, the rise of ransomware getting into the ICS space in some of the same ways it's been in enterprise for longer. Yeah. But, in addition, all of this activity from, 4, 5, 6 different Russian threat groups that has been going at a much faster pace than we've seen a lot of ICS stuff in the past.
Jake, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, and I guess to add on to some of that point as well from Adam was this ties back to what I was talking about before about the malware frameworks and how these have also evolved. Originally with Ukraine 2015 and 2016, and the use of like Indestroyer, it was fairly modular. But as we've seen some more recent reporting, they're seeming to be more modular and more focused on multiple protocols, which could affect different multiple different companies or organizations in a way that has kind of been an evolution over time. Plus, I think, especially related to the ransomware, we have seen the ransomware target the more business side of an OT organization, and it causes impacts. But we've also seen more recent reports in adversaries attempting to try and target the OT embedded systems as well, which I found to be fairly interesting in the kind of evolution of that ransomware.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep an eye out for and how it's kind of changed over time.
Absolutely. So wrapping stuff up here, Adam, we look ahead maybe next year and a half or so. Any big trends that you're seeing we should be aware of?
So I think that we're probably going to see continued slow trends in adversaries' advancing behavior and responses to improved defenses. That's no different than it's been, the past decade and a half, where, as we improve, there is a slow trend on both sides of that. We're not seeing adversaries suddenly pivot 90 degrees and pull, absolutely stunning brand new things we weren't expecting out of a hat, so much as, well, we got really good over here where they had been in the past. And so they're having to move, a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and maybe eventually push them into this new space where things are happening. Now, on the defensive side, I think we're starting to see a little bit more convergence. So where, as we started out talking about going back and forth between things like ICS and enterprise, I'm hoping to see more convergence between things like people looking at their OT and IT security together. And similarly for attack, where we also deal in mobile, looking at their cell phones. These companies have all these devices that have tons of information attached to the same networks. They've, in previous security, looked very separately at mobile security. The iOS guy is sitting down the hall, isn't in the same SOC, isn't using the same tools as sort of the enterprise. But we now have intrusions that are starting out on mobile devices and working into the enterprise, where I'm hoping that those two sides work together. And so my hope is that all three of those spaces we see coming a little bit more together over the next year and a half.
Yeah, I think especially, when you look at industrial, there's a lot more mobile devices coming onto the plant floor. A lot of stuff coming on from cloud networks, especially from assuming what looks like a very reliable source, whether it looks like Google or it looks like Outlook or whatever the case may be, and not always the case. Been a lot of malware drops coming through that way. So that's a great point in terms of being more cognizant of those mobile devices and what they're able to access. Jake, I'm going to throw a different question to you, kind of wrapping things up here. I'll let you go whatever direction you want with this one. Maybe you can tell us either, what keeps, you see all of these attacks coming in and all this information, potentially what's either keeping you up at night, or from the more positive perspective, what helps you go to sleep at night? How do you feel good about stuff and when things are happening right now?
Yeah. I think that there's definitely been a growth in the community of ICS security and really OT security in general, both in publishing and talking about the different problems. So I think that that's a really positive direction moving forward, that it seems like there's a lot of people really interested in protecting these systems and improving the security posture across the board. So that's one of the things that the community around it, and especially what I see from community feedback towards Attack for ICS, it at least makes it a little bit easier to go to sleep at night. And especially with the emergence of, a lot of these community tools and other things that can kind of help those owners and operators to maybe get some more visibility for themselves. I think that that's moving in a good direction.
Thanks, Jake and Adam. And for more information on the Attack database, you can check it out at attack.mitre.org. That's attack.mitre.org. And thank you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore in Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@ien.com. For Jake Steele and Adam Pennington, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.